Welcome back to another wonderful episode of Success Innovation. Thank you so much to the listeners and to the viewers for joining me once again. Today's episode is called Raised in Hollywood, but Worlds Apart. You'll understand why this is the title as we meet with our special guest today, whose name is Bartholomew Perez. He grows up in Hollywood, but literally he's living in worlds apart because of the opportunities he had while in elementary school. Let's get started. Welcome back to another wonderful episode of Success Innovation. Thank you so much to the audience, to the viewers of the YouTube channel, to the listeners of the podcast. This is a wonderful opportunity for you to learn about another wonderful individual that I have. And just to remind you, if you find Success Innovation useful, beneficial, and of value, please leave your review in whichever platform you are watching or listening to. Also, please share, subscribe, and like each and every single episode that you listen to or watch about Success Innovation. Now, today I'm really proud and really happy to bring Bartholomew Perez. Bartholomew Perez is a mechanical engineer working at Northrop Grumman. He has held 5 positions in the 3 years that he's been with this company. He graduated from California State University, Northridge. Currently, he has completed his master's in architecture-based systems engineering from the University of California, San Diego, otherwise known as UCSD. Welcome, Bartholomew Perez. Welcome to Success Innovation. How are you this evening?
I'm doing well, probably better than I deserve. Thank you, Lázaro, for having me.
Now, thank you for agreeing to do this interview with me with Success Innovation. Thank you, sir. Um, would you mind telling us about your early stage beginnings? Where did you grow up, and how did you definitely stumble into STEM?
Okay, so I grew up in what's known as Little Armenia or East Hollywood, California, so LA. I grew up and born to immigrant parents, both from Mexico, Oaxaca, Mexico. I grew up in LA, and it was two siblings. I was the eldest of three, all boys. So the household was pretty chaotic for my mom, but it was always fun because brotherly love, right?
Mhm.
Um, I went to high school in Hollywood High, and I had a brief idea and recollection of what it was I wanted to do transitioning into university. And really, I only applied to university because everybody else was doing it.
Okay.
So it was around the time everybody was doing pre-SATs and SATs, and then I figured I should probably get my my everything together and just apply. So that's really what I did. And it wasn't until second year in university at CSUN that I thought about engineering. It was either going to be engineering or business, and I took engineering.
Okay, fantastic. And we'll get a little bit into how you decided to go into engineering at the second year. That's kind of surprising at the university level, but I want to explore a little bit about your early family life. You said you have 3 siblings, your mom and dad, right? Okay, so your parents are immigrants. All 3 children were born in the U.S.?
That is correct.
Okay. Okay. So your parents are coming and they're definitely immigrants and they're trying to raise children in the United States, different country for them. Was a language issue Spanish mainly spoken at your home by your parents? And did you guys actually grew up speaking Spanish or were you more fond of English?
So English was definitely the
Okay. Okay.
second language. So I was one of those ESL students, the English as a second language.
Okay.
So Spanish was the predominant language in the household. It was an easy transition because there was enough practice. My mom even took courses in English just so she could communicate with us so we can get the extra practice. So the involvement was never lacking.
Mm-hmm.
Language was never a barrier, but it definitely opened up more opportunities because it's the
Mm-hmm.
United States and everything happens in English.
Of course, yes. And I just want to make sure, because you mentioned immigrant parents coming over here, and I wanted to make sure that I paint the clear picture to the audience and to the listeners of where your background lies and essentially how it happens. So, elementary school is pretty common. You go from kindergarten through sixth grade, and all of a sudden you hit middle school. Was junior high separate, six, seven, and eight, or was it seven and eight, and then high school?
Yeah, so it was separate. So Santa Monica Elementary, LeConte Middle School, and then Hollywood High School.
Okay. And what was your earliest recollection of involvement with STEM? At what age and grade level?
Involvement. So there weren't real clubs that I was involved with. If it really was the second year in university that I was very involved because of
Okay.
SHIP, the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. But if I were to recollect anything, it would be like the chemistry or physics experiments that teachers would have. That
Hmm.
was as brief as it would get, and the occasional videos and like tutorials about what's out there, like space. But never did I think of it as a profession that anybody that looked like me could actually engage in.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Why did you never think that you could possibly pursue that type of career?
So partly has to be definitely the upbringing. It was a little rough on the rough side. So when I could, I would try to help out my parents with work. It wasn't something that was required. Obviously, I was a child, but to make ends meet, my mom was a housekeeper. My father worked at a factory. There were instances that I would go with my dad to help him out with work and earn a little extra so that we could buy groceries, the essentials, right? Because we weren't lacking essentials, but we did worry about, okay, will we have enough for the next month? So in that sense, so after school activities were not a thing. It was go to school, do some work, and then she also did my mother. She did like sewing, and I guess it was kind of like a um, with clothing, and we would help her like take it all apart because the way that her work function was by the volume, and we figured
Hmm.
the more she did, the more money we could have coming into the household.
So
So that
she
was
was
her.
essentially a seamstress of
There
sorts,
you go,
right? Okay.
seamstress. That's the word.
Right.
So
Okay.
housekeeping and seamstress.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. So she was a stay-at-home mom, but she was doing odd works, seamstress type of work that she could do at home without really leaving the house for the most part. And you guys, as young children, would go help your dad at the factory. At the factory, what exactly was your dad doing?
It was like food packaging. So
Food
really
packaging.
just making sure that it's going where it's supposed to go. And really we
Okay.
were just putting it into the containers that they're supposed to go. And you'd have like an assembly line as it's moving along,
Hmm.
and just make sure that the packaging is correct.
Okay, so you essentially had a early start on, learning how to make money, and you were young, and that's because, your family really needed to make that extra cash to keep you guys afloat, et cetera, et cetera. All right, fair enough. Was going to college, you mentioned that, you went to college because a lot of the students kind of were in that mindset of applying to the PSAT, the SAT, applying to different college universities, but you really had no idea as to what type of career you were going to pursue. How influential were your parents in pushing forth the idea of pursuing higher education? Did they actually instill that in you at a young age, or was that something that you learned just by watching others in your high school?
So my mom definitely pushed it on us. The fact and the reason she came to the United States was to pursue a higher education. So she was attending university in Oaxaca, but she needed the money. So she came briefly to get as much money as she could to pay tuition, but that didn't end up happening. It was after she got pregnant with me, she decided to stay. She figured that she would figure it out, and it would give me more opportunities being here as opposed to in Mexico in her idea, right, of the world. Um, so she would, growing up, she would tell us like, "Mijo, go to school because I don't want you guys to be worried about money the way that we are." And I would see it. It was a stressful subject, and because of that, the idea was there, but actually pursuing it, that wasn't a reality because the ticket, along with the education, as far as tuition, that was a concern before I learned about the FAFSA. Not knowing about the FAFSA, like, okay, the state will actually sponsor my going to school. And then it was then, okay, it became more of a reality.
Okay, so FAFSA, for those who are listening, is essentially the California state funded application for financial aid, essentially. That's what it stands for. and you obviously qualified because of your financial situation with your parents, and it also takes into account and wages the grades and GPA of the high school student and the extracurricular activities, volunteering, and there's quite a bit that goes into it. So uh, congratulations on being able to achieve that there, Bartholomew. So you get to CSUN, so California State University of Norwich. So now you're there. You go in undeclared, from what I understand, and you go through the motions. And how did you fall into engineering?
So I'll go back even a little further. So I made
Okay.
the conscious decision at 17 to just disconnect from the household. So be
Okay.
self-sustaining and live either by campus or at the dorms. I decided to live at the dorms. So it was also me trying to take responsibility for employment. So I was holding two jobs along the way. And again, if it wasn't for the student involvement that second year, then engineering wouldn't have happened because SHIP regularly promoted general body meetings. And they
Hmm.
promoted meetings that they had free food on occasion. And
Okay.
as a student,
Right. Yes.
nothing sounds better than free food.
Right. Yes. For sure. For sure.
But after that initial meeting, I kept coming back. I made good friends and we shared common classes. And because of that connection, it was comfortable, it was familiar, and we can talk about the struggle. Like, one, as a first generation Latino with immigrant parents, that English was not the first language. And at the same time, having to work several jobs and still maintain a good GPA.
Okay, fantastic. So let me go back to when you first hear about SHIP. And for those who listen who have heard other episodes, SHIP stands for Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. But you're on campus, you see a flyer, and then you see the initial SHIP, SHPE, and you're like, what is this? Or how did it happen? And what made you go aside? Well, obviously the food attracted you, but what made you continue attending?
Yeah, it was the familia, that sense of familia, because it was the home away from home. That was
Okay.
part of it. The professional development was a big part because, again, not knowing that professional world, the resume building, communication skills, how to pitch yourself, and what it means to have a brand. So when people think of Lázaro Herrera or Bartholomew Perez, what are the things that come to mind? And that those are the sort of things that I started thinking about. And it was more organized, more collective, and it felt like the package that somebody as an undergrad needed in order to transition from schooling to professional.
Okay.
And that's what I
And
needed.
and then your second year, is that when you actually decided to submit and petition to become a mechanical engineer?
Yeah, and that was after an advisement where the college counselor saw that my performance in the prerequisites to every other major, that my math was pretty okay, and I was getting good grades. So she suggested, "Hey, why don't you look into engineering?" So I left that with that idea again about engineering. I Google searched it,
Okay.
and I Google searched, "Why should I become an engineer?"
Okay. So
So the
literally, why should I become an engineer? Okay. All right.
literally, why?
Okay.
And so the top five things that I remember is you can make an impact on the world, you work on cutting edge technologies, um, you help people, and then finally, like, decent salaries. But really, it was that number one about being able to make a difference. And that stood out to me.
Okay. All right. So you selected mechanical engineering off of all the engineering branches. I mean, you could have gone aero, you could have gone electrical, chemical, computer. Why did you select mechanical? What
So
appealed to you about it?
at that time, cars were a big interest, airplanes, aircraft were a big interest.
Hmm.
At the same time, trying to be strategic about it. Mechanical, when I would talk to some of the other ship members, they
Hmm.
presented it as the most generic discipline. So it would
Hmm.
capture as many as possible, which is what I wanted, options.
Hmm.
Options are good. So
Okay.
at that point, I figured if I graduate with this degree, I can apply it to almost any other discipline, which is true because towards the end of my undergrad, I had different offers in different industries, and that was great.
Okay. Okay. So you go through the second year, you're in SHIP, you're just a participating member. Did you ever participate and take an active leadership role in SHIP after that? And what was it?
Yes, so it really was along the way. I would hold like chair positions, like historian or social chair, but it was until my final year in undergrad. So as a senior, I took up president, and at that time, our chapter at CSUN wasn't in the best position. So there was really no membership. There was hardly a board, and the 5 board members that we did gather, that was going to be the benchmark for all the other board members. And I wanted that challenge because I didn't want to see the familia that started off in my second year just fizzle out because nobody wanted to be involved. Or
Mm,
I think at the time it was nobody really knew that SHIP was on campus by then,
mm.
because the transitions might have fallen out. And so it was just a matter of, okay, well, let's just bring the membership back up. And then those to succeed after my term can pick it up. And that's exactly what happened.
What was the biggest obstacle that you encountered after you took the presidency?
I would say asking for help.
Asking for help.
Because yeah, it's something so simple, right? But I wanted to do as much as possible, and at times it felt like if I was asking for help, it would kind of be a burden on somebody else, which isn't the case, because it's more you're giving you're allowing somebody else to take on a leadership role and really trusting somebody else that they're capable and willing to do it as well. That was something difficult to overcome, but as my term progressed, it became easier and easier, and I had a phenomenal board that year.
Okay, so I think what you're saying is when you say asking for help, does that mean delegating some of the tasks that you wanted to do, not necessarily asking for help as far as the presidency goes on how to lead, but just delegating some of the work so that it could be evenly distributed by all the board members to participate equally? Okay,
Exactly.
making sure that that's my understanding is correct. Thank you, Bartholomew, for that. So you everybody should know that SHIP has a national conference, national convention every year, once a year, and it goes nationwide at different places. 2019, it was in Arizona. 2020 will be in Denver, Colorado, which I'm assuming that you've attended the national convention of SHIP or did not?
I
Okay, you
have,
did.
yes.
Okay, how many times did you or have you attended so far?
So the first time was that same year as president.
Okay.
Money was the biggest issue as an undergrad. So I was able to save up enough that year, and there was sponsorship from the school too, which was available, made it possible. I was in Detroit. I attended that year, and I attended last year. So it was great to see the differences as a student trying to find employment, and now as a professional being able to give out employment as a recruiting agent for Northrop Grumman.
Okay, so I'm going to take you back to that first time when you're the president and you're actually going to the convention over in Detroit. What was your expectation? What was your mindset? I'm pretty sure that you were scared. There's a lot of doubt. There's a lot of uncertainty of, am I going to do this correctly? How am I going to impress the recruiters? Because you want a job and you've heard about the convention. You probably Googled it also, and you probably saw pictures, and you were probably getting ready about a week or maybe a month beforehand before you actually went. So can you walk us through that process leading up to the actual stepping in to the convention hall for the first time?
So the months leading to that, we were definitely preparing. So we made it a point to get as many workshops as possible for all the membership to benefit whatever membership we did have, and to make sure that the anxiety that comes with attending such a big conference, that when you Google, you realize that there's all these employers wanting to fill these positions, right? But now at the same time, there's a lot of students competing for these positions. So let's make sure that our membership is competent and confident enough to be able to fill those roles. So that's the level of of preparation that we had going in. Yes, it was a bit nerve-wracking, And I did also participate in a design competition that was sponsored by Nissan that year. That was the first time that they held that. So it was myself and our vice president at the time, Diego Vilches. We both participated in it. We were both finalists, and that was another part of the experience to ship besides the career fair and attending all the workshops, being able to network. Because again, when you look it up, you see that networking is one of those aspects that you have to do, and it is a skill to develop.
So let me ask you about that networking skill. Obviously, for some of us, we're introverted. We don't really want to talk and reach out to individuals, not because we don't want to, just because we're scared and we feel that we're not really prepared to reach out to a professional, or prepared to ask the correct question, or even prepared to carry on a conversation. How did you get the courage to actually go ahead and network at this huge convention where about 10,000 individuals tend to show up, and most of them are Latino for the most part, including men and women. So how do you actually get the courage to build your networking skills?
I think when you failed enough times, you realize what works and what doesn't. The other great thing about my undergrad was I was involved in a fraternity, in a salsa dancing team. I was a competitive and performer. And those sort of things also prepare you, because when you're on stage for something like performing, there's no going back. Once you're there, like you have to execute. Um, but really, it's the constant preparation. I remember I would record myself and play it back to see what sort of mannerisms, or if I'm using fillers, if I'm not projecting enough, that to make sure that I correct those before I attend the conference.
Okay, so you did record yourself, you practiced, you sketched up an elevator pitch, which is essentially who you are, what you are doing, how you have been prepared, and what type of candidate you are for any particular position. That goes with for a couple minutes, not more than 3 minutes or so, to go ahead and capture the attention of a possible recruiter at that convention. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, fantastic. All right. So you're at the convention, you're the president, you go to this project that the Nissan puts together. All of a sudden, you are in the career fair. You have your resumes on hand. There's hundreds of big companies that you could possibly reach out to. How did you determine which ones you want to go speak to? Because the lines are immense. I mean, do you sign up beforehand? Do you actually do research? Is there a website that you have to go into? And when you go into it, do you actually have to register? Can you walk us through that process that you went through?
Sure. So I'll start off with the design competition, because that's practically an entire day event, if not 2-day event. So I was willing to lose sleep to tailor my resume to specific employers. So I had my heart set on aerospace and defense. I already knew that. So I already had my list that I'd visit, like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, GE Aviation, and Collins. So I had my list, and really it was the executive suites where they had their like private event. That's where students needed and should want to be, because that's where they were pre-selecting and pre-screening to give out offers either on the spot, or once the career fair came, that they were already assigned an interview. So I was I was doing the web portals. I was on LinkedIn. At the time, it wasn't as big as it is now, but I was on there regardless, responding and looking up recruiter information. And at the same time, I was making sure that my membership was also as informed as I was. But by having my plan beforehand, I knew what sort of employers I wanted to look at. Granted, I did visit a few others just to get the anxiety out, hype myself up before I even got there.
Right. Yeah, right. So let me go back to, you mentioned, the hospitality suites of different companies. I know what that is, but for the audience that might not be knowledgeable about what that is, can you tell us what that is?
Sure. So the hospitality suite.
And how do you actually get invited to those?
So the hospitality suite, it's an exclusive social event. It's supposed to be as relaxed as possible. They'll have tons of food, tons of drinks, non-alcoholic and the latter. But the whole point is to have this setting where the employers can already have an idea and gauge who it is that they want to give out a potential offer to and who is a candidate. Because at the end of the day, we're also people, so we want to be able to communicate and work with each other at the same time that we're practicing technical capabilities. So either you get an advance notice saying, like, we found your resume on the ship website and we want to offer you an invitation to the hospitality suite. So that's one way. Second way is the first day that you arrive, that you visit the table or you find somebody that belongs to that company, because they'll have tickets to hand out. That's how it's worked in the past. And you build that network. And if it goes well, they'll offer you a ticket to the hospitality suite. And if not, usually on the day of, if they have space, they'll let students in. But it's one of those exclusive things that every student should want to be at.
Right, of course. And as Bartholomew said, it's not open, it's not an open invitation. You actually have to be invited to this type of events. And sometimes companies will reach out to individual chapters and ask those chapter presidents or members to gather about 5 or 10 of their people to go to those events beforehand. Sometimes you will, like Bartholomew said, you will get invited because of the selection process when they do a filtering. So watch out for that, and that's a good tip that everybody should be knowledgeable about, or at least be asking or be mindful of to also impress anybody at any given point. And that goes to also inform everybody, wherever you are, whenever you are, with whomever you are, treat him as a potential recruiter, because you have to behave in a professional manner at all times, regardless of whether you're inside the convention in front of recruiters or outside just talking. You never know. A recruiter might be passing by and they might see you talking a certain way, and then they might see you in line. And when you get to them, you're a totally different person. They don't want to see a totally different person. So you have to behave professional at all times within and outside of the premises. And this is just my piece of advice to everybody that's watching and listening, to go ahead and heed it and make sure that you take it and take it to heart. So you go through that. Is that where you actually got an internship to
No,
to
at
work?
that point, at that point, I did have interviews. So the interviews that I did manage to get were with GE and Aviation and Collins Aerospace. At that point, because I was so involved in the competition for Nissan, I missed out on being able to have anything for Northrop or Lockheed. But I told myself then that if not then, eventually I will be with those companies, which is fine. Um, those I had those interviews. I didn't receive offers from either of them, but at the same time, I was still looking for offers outside of the conference. So I didn't have an internship before I graduated. It was after the fact and after the conference that it led to employment.
Okay. So when you actually get your first job, was it an engineering company, or how did it come about?
So that one, it was a manufacturing company for aerospace parts. So this happened because of a mutual network.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
our vice president at the time, he was acquainted with one of the directors, and he knew that they were looking for engineers. And it was from that connection that after I reached out, they were willing to interview me. And because of that, they gave me an offer. It was a temp to hire offer, but I was okay with it because I wanted to be in aerospace. And I wanted to see at that time the operations and how uh, a global supply chain for aerospace might look like. So this was a great stepping stone in that direction.
Right. And it gave you something to actually put in your resume that is in the aerospace division. And this is in manufacturing. A lot of aerospace does manufacturing. So definitely, that's a good stepping stone to get into. So then how did you come about And what was your first job or foot in the door with Northrop?
I was at that employer, Mason Electric. That was the name of the company. I was with Mason Electric for about a year and a half, 2 years. And then after that, I went into Northrop as a packaging engineer. So the switch from there at Silmar, California for Mason Electric to Palmdale, California for Northrop Grumman was one, a promotion, which was something I was looking for. But at the same time, again, thinking operations and thinking how the supply chain works, packaging engineering was the thing that stood out.
Okay. Okay. So when you're going over from your previous employer to Northrop Grumman, how many interviews did you have to go through before you actually got into Northrop?
I actually kept track of the number of applications that I put out. So I put out a total of 71, and it was that 71st that actually I received a response. And it also happened because I reached out to the recruiter directly. That was the caveat that I think made a difference.
Okay.
But before then, it was phone interviews, but nothing went beyond that. That made
And the reason I'm asking is because you made it sound so easy and smooth of a transition, but I want the audience to understand that, hey, it's not all roses and colorful rainbows to transition into another company. Sometimes you have to work really hard at it, and as you mentioned, it's that 71st that you only needed one to actually stick. So you mentioned something key. You keep on going back to the networking portion, and you networking. So if the audience is listening to this, make sure that you learn how to network and you nourish those relationships, because they will come in handy in the future. When you reached out to that recruiter, how did you do it? Was it through LinkedIn? Was it through a card that you actually got at one of the conventions? How did you actually reach out to this recruiter?
So I did two things. One, I asked a mutual friend that was already working there if they knew somebody. The second thing I did was I went on LinkedIn and looked up the recruiter's name. That once I found a requisition I knew I wanted to be a part of, that I referred them to it so that they can at least, if they could find who that person was, that I could at least just have a name. That's all I needed, a name. I reached out to them, and she was very nice. She was very kind, and she was willing to hear me out over a phone call. And after the phone call, that's where, okay, we move forward. Like, yeah, well, I think you'd be a good fit for this. And so I proceeded to an interview, but really it was asking my sphere if they knew this person that happened to know somebody for that requisition in particular.
Right, fantastic, fantastic. So you started at Northrop, and then let's fast forward to you decide to go for a master's. How did that come about? And why did you decide to go for a master's if you already had a bachelor's in mechanical engineering?
So one of the great things about Northrop is that they fully fund certain masters. The UC San Diego is one of those masters, and I knew I wanted a background in systems engineering. Again, going back to the operations and knowing how an organization really works. And with the systems engineering masters, I knew I would get a little bit of like management, a little bit of finance, a little bit of requirements and contracts, and at the same time still be involved with the people as a leader. Um, those are the baselines and benchmarks to what systems engineering is. So again, thinking operations, that was the big driver. But at the same time, I knew after I graduated that I would go back, but I needed a little bit more experience to really know what emphasis to focus on. And it came down to operations and knowing how a corporation can really work.
Okay, so you go back to UCSD, but you're up in Palmdale at this time, right?
Yeah, so
So how far is Palmdale, for those who don't know, all the way down to UCSD, which is over in La Jolla in San Diego? Did you actually drive there to go to class, or did you do virtual classes?
so they had the option for virtual with
Okay.
advance notice before COVID.
Okay.
Now it's kind of forced upon us, but really I wanted to be present at the campus because I knew that, one, the network, I would meet people that I wouldn't be able to meet over a virtual world. And that's exactly what happened. Had COVID not happened, I would have been in Washington, D.C. for science and engineering advocacy in the White House to learn about policies on how the federal budget works for funding like things that NASA projects and defense budgets, that sort of thing. But 180 miles one way, that could be 3.5 hours or 4.5 hours, depending on traffic. So round trip, and I would stay the weekend, 2-3 days, however long it was. And yeah, it's a 1-year program, which was another attractive thing because most system engineering programs were at least 2 years.
Okay, so was that with the business school of business, or was that with the Jacobs School of Engineering that you did
So
the master's?
it's a Jacobs, but it was a joint effort between Jacobs and Rady School of
Okay,
Business.
Jacobs and Rady. Okay, fantastic. Did you connect with the ship chapter there, the student ship chapter? Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
I
Okay.
made sure.
Okay. Fantastic. All right. How did you find out about them, and what did you see different from the CSUN versus UCSD?
So I was referred to them because they were looking for panelists. So that was the first way. They were looking for panelists that were already professionals and already had a master's. And I figured if they wanted to know somebody that was doing both of them at the same time, well, this is a perfect opportunity. So I was referred to by one of our admins and a director of education for the program. And I also connected with the professional chapter. I attended a couple of their events, and very helpful, all different disciplines. And the idea, again, coming down to networking and helping one another out.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, so we keep on going back to the networking portion, and for the listeners and to the viewers, you got to take note that networking seems to be something of a key on how to succeed for this type of thing. So you held 5 roles within the 3 years that you've been with Northrop. How does that happen, and do you recommend people actually do that?
So I would baseline on what it is you're trying to achieve, first of all. So if you're goal oriented, I always like to begin with the end in mind. So knowing where I want to end up. It's kind of like planning out a travel itinerary. You know you're going to go to X destination like the Bahamas, right? So what do you need to do to get there in the first place? That's how I treat my career, is where do I want to end up? I know eventually I want to be a manager, maybe an executive. And I use that as my baseline. So coming back to the operations, if you look at just trends on what executive roles typically look like, they're in operations, they're in people-related disciplines. So because of that, I wanted to be able to see as much of Northrop Grumman as possible. Do I recommend it? If operations and management and leadership is something that you're passionate about, by all means, I think it's a great trajectory and a good strategy for you to take. You'll learn a lot, and you'll have to learn a lot quickly because you have to be adept and aware of everything that's going on. So if you're picking up different roles, or at least roles that are related, which is what I did, so I started off in manufacturing, right, with the emphasis in supply chain and packaging. I transitioned into Northrop in packaging first. I went into logistics, combined that with mechanical engineering. I got promoted to a principal engineer, and now I'm transitioning to a systems architect engineering. So I feel like at this point it's coming all together as to seeing how all the different platforms at Northrop exist and communicate with one another.
Okay. Can you kind of briefly tell us what your day-to-day work is, what do you actually do, and if the coursework that you've took in CSUN actually prepared you for the job at your current employer?
So day to day, so it's in a logistics and global supply chain function. So goods movement, when you think about goods movement, we're moving airplanes, we're moving parts, spare parts around the world. So when you think about it, packaging has to be good, contracts have to be in place, people have to be talking in order to receive them, to deploy them if they need them. So big picture day to day is dealing with that sort of coordination. On the latter, the design side is if there's custom packaging that's required because there's $1 million product that has to be protected, that's another aspect. So that's where my background in mechanical engineering, because I've I have had to do finite element analysis and practice my vibrations and practice what it means to design to a factor of safety that's per spec. Uh, it's been a very involved role, more than I anticipated, but it's been great experience because, again, coming back to the operations and letting me see how it is that the corporation works.
Yeah, fantastic. What has been the biggest obstacle during your career with Northrop Grumman, inside Northrop Grumman?
Biggest obstacle.
And how have you overcome it? I mean, obviously you've had 5 roles, but has there been an obstacle that you've encountered and how did you overcome
I wouldn't say that I've had obstacles so far.
it? Yeah.
I've been pretty agile and I adapt to any given situation, what makes it easier. Um, I've had phenomenal teams to work with. Sometimes I guess the deadlines might be a bit much, but they're manageable. Um, if anything, I would go back to just the time management and making sure that I don't sell myself short on giving enough time and attention to what needs to be delivered, either to internal stakeholders or customers that we might have. But I can't, that's a tough question. I can't really think
Right.
of
No,
one.
I understand. And what I'm trying to get at here is I'm trying to get at what type of advice would you give to a young professional individual that is starting at the first position and they want to move up the corporate ladder? How should they actually do it? Because some individuals get stuck in a rut of actually holding one position for a long time and they get passed for a promotion. They get passed and they continue being in the same position, same department. And how did you manage to actually move up or move around?
So I would, if you have the vision and you see yourself in management,
Okay.
take the chance on yourself. If you're flexible enough and can relocate, Selmar to Palmdale is not far apart, but it's far enough to feel the difference because it's not as close to the city. So
Okay.
if nightlife is something that's important to you, Palmdale will not probably not be a good fit. But at the same time, it's not that far. You're spending majority of the day at work anyway, so it's really in the evenings and the night and the weekends that you'll spend in the city. Keeping that in mind, I think it's all a choice. So if anybody's okay with the same role for 15 years, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you do feel like you're stuck, I would say and I would propose just bringing it up to your manager.
Okay.
Sometimes it's not, we're not asking enough. I know that I brought up the difficult conversations about negotiation and promotions, and I think those things led up to being able to have those 5 roles and disciplines at Northrop because of
Right. So here we go. You know, having an open
that.
communication with your manager, being able to communicate with them so that you can actually articulate what you want and formulate your goals and your wants, and they will be able to guide you through them. Sometimes maybe not necessarily will hand you something, but they'll give you some sort of advice and find a mentor. Find mentors that can definitely help you and guide you and help you formulate those goals in a better format so that you can actually achieve them and lay a path. Sometimes corporations have development plans, IDPs, that can help you whether you want to stay in the technical role or move up into the managerial executive role. And you can definitely formulate that with your manager. So go ahead and take that advice. And if you want to move up and get promotions, that's how you start the conversation. If you approach your manager saying, hey, I have a plan. This is what I ambition. This is where I see myself in 5 years down the road. We all get asked, what do you ambition yourself doing 5 years down the road? Most of us don't sit and think about it too much. So that's why we don't really go, or we don't grow, and we don't move up, and we don't go up the corporate ladder. But if you start doing that, you'll start impressing your managers. You'll start impressing that executive board of directors, and all of a sudden you become a name and a face that's in front of them, and it's continuously asking. You don't have to be perfect because perfection is the enemy of getting it done. So as soon as you jump in there and you actually start asking the questions, you start becoming more of a leader. And they'll start shaping you, informing you, and making sure that you get what you want and that you are put in a position that they believe you can handle for that role. So thank you, Bartholomew, for actually sharing that type of information with us. So you mentioned that you want to continue in the managerial role, but you also, I noticed that you are running for a position with SHIP professional. How did that come about? And you're a professional, you made it, and why do you feel the need to volunteer outside of work?
This comes from a position of giving back and gratitude. So, yes, I've networked a lot, but at the same time, I've had mentors that made it possible for me by sharing their stories, sharing what worked for them and what didn't work for them. So, there were certain mistakes and probably obstacles that I was able to avoid because I listened to them. That was first and foremost. And so, when I meet with a group of students, I listen to what it is that they're concerned about. And the themes tend to be pretty consistent, is about confidence and being prepared or not prepared enough, and what it takes to be a professional. And really it's these types of questions that when I do end up sharing my story, it's, well, if I can do it, you can definitely do it. And you could probably do it better and not have to deal with any of what I might have gone through because I didn't think about it well enough. But by me telling you now, you can excel even more than I could. So I am running for the R2 Regional Vice President, so Region 2. And really, I figured at this point, this stage, 5 years, going on to 6 years into my career, it's a great point because I can share enough and enough about the professional world, what it takes. And at the same time, as a student, recently graduated from a master's, and it was only 5 years from undergrad. So that relationship between empathy and sympathy between what students are still going through, it's still there, but it all comes back to the gratitude, because when I narrow it down, it's the relationships, the professional development, and that feeling of familia that really made a difference for me.
All right, so here we go. Once again, Bartholomew brings up a good point. He wants to give back and a sense of gratitude to SHIP because SHIP, the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, helped him when he was an undergrad and continues helping him as a professional. I see some students when they're undergrads, they go through and they benefit from SHIP, Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, and then they get a job, and all of a sudden, life becomes more hectic, but all of a sudden it becomes complacent and they feel that I've made it. I don't have to do more. And CHIP was only for college students and I don't really need to go back. And I'm not, everybody has their own priorities. And I commend Bartholomew and a lot of people that are coming back and providing support, mentorship for those students that really need it. But also by teaching others, you learn the lessons twice. You definitely continue becoming and honing on your leadership skills. You become that leader outside of a corporation that then translates becoming a leader within that corporation that pays you for a job that later on can definitely benefit off of those leadership skills. So don't feel that volunteering is only on your free time and it's a waste of time, but you're actually investing on yourself for your future employment. So take that into consideration for those of you that are not necessarily volunteering. So with that being said, you mentioned, Bartholomew, that you want to continue in the managerial executive path, but where do you see yourself in about 5 years?
I think this is a role that I'm going to be staying in for a bit, and it might very well be the 5 years. Um, and I say that because as the master's, it really interested me in how the operations works, right? So now I'm looking at different platforms at Northrop. So it's not just aircraft, right, that Northrop produces. Because of that, I think the 5 years is enough time to learn what I need to learn and then continue on to the managerial path. Um, but during this time, at least as a professional, I can see myself because I'm relocating from Palmdale to Redondo Beach,
Right.
um, closer to the city.
Right, and
But
that's a quite a change. And yes, you're right. 5 years in that new role would be definitely a new stable challenge to go ahead and tackle to see how far you can actually grow and prosper in that position. Amazing. You also, I want to ask you about leaders. You mentioned that you had mentors, but good leaders always create good leaders. Do you have any individuals that you actually look up to? Any mentors that you found along the way that have helped you? And if you can mention them, and mention one or two pieces of advice that you've learned and have been able to apply to your success at this point.
yeah, and at different capacities for these mentors,
Mhm.
at the director level, at the managerial level, and even at the professional level, just a contributor, just like myself, right? So at the different levels, everybody's going to say different pieces of advice. At the director level, what he told me was, if you really want to pursue the executive path, well, you're going to have to give up a lot because one, you're going to be working hours that probably nobody else is working. You got to be okay with that. You're going to be sacrificing family time and free time for going on a business trip because they need you somewhere. Um, so being prepared for that sort of thing, that's what they prepared me for. From the management side is trusting that your people will be able to provide and be able to execute best to the best of their capabilities. And if they're not, what can you provide them with? What sort of tools? What sort of trainings? Do they have to talk to a different organization? And it's just that facilitation that's missing as a manager. And then from the individual level, as somebody that's a similar level at T3 for myself, is if we're staying in the same place and want to move forward, and all that's stopping us is just a step forward, it's that movement, right? That's making the biggest difference. So don't be afraid, move forward and see what it's like. If not, if you don't like it, you can always go back, but at least the experience did not go missing, because you'll miss 100% of the opportunities you do not take, right?
Right, exactly. You miss 100% of the opportunities you do not take. So if you bat 0 times, you're going to hit the ball 0 times. That's in layman's terms what he's trying to say. So swing the bat, regardless of whether you hit the ball or not. You're more than likely going to hit it. So what do you believe your superpower to be?
Superpower.
Yes.
I think I get it from my mom, and if I were to name it anything, it would be resilience.
Okay.
Um, that's one of the values of SHIP too, which is kind of ironic, right? But again, I think because we look at a demographic that has to be resilient. Um,
Right.
so I definitely, I would say that resilience, I get that superpower from my mom. If I think of like fictional characters, something like what Wolverine would be from the X-Men.
Oh, nice. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. Fantastic. Yes. And he is resilient. He gets hurt and he gets back up. You could fall 100 or 1,000 times, but it's not how many times you fall. It's how many times you actually decide to get back up and continue going forward. So that's the resilience. And you're correct. Raquel Tames put out, the espresso shots for the professionals, and I think she released it a couple of days back or today, when we're actually recording. But for the people that are watching, it's probably a couple of days after it happened. But she mentioned resilient, so that is a key word for nuestra familia, to be resilient. Para la raza, continue being resilient, continue pushing forward with whatever obstacles you see. Don't get depressed, don't get bogged down. Sit down, look at the situation, analyze it, and either go through it, circumvent it, or overcome it. But continue being resilient throughout that. So, do you have any particular book, movie, or podcast that you believe has made an impact in your life that you wish more people would actually watch or listen to, read, to take advantage of it to become successful?
So I'll start off with books,
Okay.
because one of my mentors suggested the five people you meet in heaven. So these are supposed to be the 5 people that made the greatest impact in your life, whether you need it or not. And this is the sort of thing I think when we try to think about where we're at now, like what 5 people, what sort of conversations that we had or did not have that made an impact on who we are today. Movies like Limitless, where we're we're using like 1,000% capacity of our brains, right? And
Right,
we're
right.
thinking of every possibility possible. It goes back to resilient characters that they've had to endure, they've had to overcome and really be creative. Um, I thrive and I love being creative. So I'm a huge dancer. Salsa dancing, that's a big thing. I had a brief period of theater background and those sort of things too. Like I like to dive into that as well.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for sharing those. Definitely, and those are awesome pieces of recommended books, and the movie that you recommended, Limitless, and the 5 people that you meet in heaven. Those are really incredible. Thank you. Everybody has a definition of success. We all look at it differently. So I would like for you to share what your definition of success at this particular moment in your life and your career is, because I know that it will probably change. But right now, what is your definition of success?
I would say having taken the opportunities, the right opportunities that fit my values. So right now, the values that I really hold are health, fitness, career, and at the same time, community service. So those 3 things align with my work at Northrop. They align with what I want to do with SHIP, what I want to continue doing with SHIP, whether I get elected or not. And at the same time, the health and fitness, because if we're not all there, if we're not content and we're not getting enough sleep, everything else kind of falls apart.
Right. And he talks about health and fitness and mental sanity, and it's a whole package. Your body, your mind, your whole self. If you're not healthy in one aspect or the other, you cannot be 100% whole and function correctly. If you're not happy at work, or if something's bothering you at home and you're going to work, you're still delving at home. So you have to have that mental 100% healthy mindset, as well as the body, to continue moving forward. Because if you have an ailment in one of your organs, or if you're overweight, or if you have diabetes, you're always worrying about that as well. And that is not 100% the healthy environment for the whole person, for the whole employee, for the whole individual. So make sure you take care of yourself professionally, mentally, physically. So go ahead and take heed of that advice. Thank you so much. This question, I really enjoy asking this question. This is, kind of at the end of it. Let's say you go back to that 17 or 18-year-old kid that's going into CSUN, and all of a sudden, you have about 2 minutes to tell him, hey, this is what you need to do. 2 or 3 pieces of advice that you would share with that younger Bartholomew Perez, when he's about to step into campus, not really having a defined path that he wants to pursue engineering. But what would you share with that young individual if you had about 2 minutes to do
So I would start off with, so there was a brief period of time where I was in foster care with my siblings, and I would tell him to overcome those demons that came with being in foster care, just because that was a big hurdle to overcome. It didn't impact me directly, but those were things that I would think about, but didn't come to terms with soon enough. So deal with that sooner. Believe that the the choices that you're making are the best ones that you can make for yourself, and to speak up even if your voice shakes, to say what's on your mind. And if you want to help somebody out, help them out the best you can. But if they don't want to be helped out and you want to help out, well, there's not really much you can do at that point, because they can't and they don't want to be helped, and that's okay.
it? Okay. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with me. And, I've had a wonderful time talking to you, learning about you, and your information is very valuable to the listeners and to the viewers of this episode. Thank you so much, Bartholomew. I really appreciate it. Once again, to the viewers, to the listeners, thank you for watching another wonderful episode of Success Innovation. You can connect with Bartholomew Perez and his LinkedIn. I will provide the information, the link below in the description. Once again, if you find Success Innovation useful, beneficial, and of value, please leave your review in whichever platform you are watching or listening to. Also, please share, subscribe, and like. Thank you, Bartholomew. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening. See you next time. This is Lázaro Herrera from Success Innovation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching another wonderful episode of Success Innovation. This time we got to learn so much about Bartholomew Perez, who works for Northrop Grumman. We learned about his road to success from his early beginnings in college at California State University of Northridge, and how he managed to go ahead and determine what he wanted to do. I hope you connect with him via LinkedIn. Thank you so much. Lázaro Herrera for Success Innovation. See you next time. Bye-bye.